The Black Phantom NPCs, they're a really underrated aspect of demons that doesn't really get brought up a lot, and it's one of those I've always been sad that they've never resurfaced, but now that Jester Thomas is here, I hope they come back. And I would even say that the other Black Phantom NPC that you meet in this DLC, God, I can't remember his name, but it's the one you meet when you go to the bonfire near the Cave of the Dead, who sort of guards that. He has a little shield, he has a little spear. And
oh yeah. Yeah, I was confused. Honestly, I thought, like, the name, I don't remember what the name was, but I thought, when I saw the name, I thought it was an NPC, but his AI was really interesting.
Yeah, he has some pretty intelligent, he has some tricks. Obviously, kind of like Thomas, because I know he hit me with a Lloyd's Talisman. And
yes.
Where he fights you, he really kind of makes use of it because you fight him on a long bridge.
Mm-hmm.
So he can really sort of corral you and hit you with that and some of his other thrown items that he's got. And then he's a spear and shield guy with a whole lot of armor on. So it makes it really hard to kind of get through there and kill him.
Yeah, I thought it was weird because I had pulled some of those bug enemies. And I was fighting them when he was approaching me from the bridge. And I'm pretty sure he consciously waited for me to kill the enemies before engaging me. And I was like, oh wow, this guy's really nice. For an invader? Wow, I would have just attacked. I would have been an opportunist asshole. Speaking of NPCs, let's talk about all the added ones to this DLC. Okay, alright, let's move on. So,
yep.
I don't mind that though. I kind of appreciated that I was expecting to see new characters, but it kind of lends a nice tone to the DLC that the only character you speak to is one of the bosses. So
yeah, and you don't even really say anything. Not that you ever do in Dark Souls, but
we were on the Dragon Sanctum before. What about those dinosaurs at the bottom?
They feel like an apology for Lost Izalith, because they feel like what the enemies there should have been.
I don't know about that.
I'm not saying it's a conscious apology or anything. It feels like something like that is what we should have been fighting in Lost Izalith instead of those giant dragon butts. And I just kind of had a humorous little thought because that area was the complete opposite of Lost Izalith, because you're fighting them in shallow water instead of lava. And it was like, I don't know, I made a weird connection with that.
Yeah, I thought the same. But aside from the fact that it's not, like, retina burning, I think it's maybe a little bit more annoying than Lost Izalith because avoiding the dinosaur asses is pretty easy. I guess actually
pretty easy post-patch. Because I don't know when you played Dark Souls, the original, and played Lost Izalith, the original, but that area was a nightmare when that game launched.
I played through about half the game pre-patch and then half of it post-patch, so I did Lost Izalith post-patch.
Lost Izalith, the original, was a nightmare. I think it took me like 3 hours to get from the bonfire in the cave with Solaire to the next bonfire. It's that bad.
Ooh.
And the positioning of all those guys were way worse, so you had to like directly run in their path and like aggro them. I distinctly remember there being a part of Lost Izalith pre-patch where you had to make the choice of, do you want to stand on this branch and shoot this guy like 100 times with arrows, or do you want to try to run through his legs and hope he doesn't do a certain attack that will kill you in one hit?
Wow, okay, yeah, I don't know, I mostly had troubles with them when I actively tried to fight them.
Yeah, no, Lost Izalith post-patch is annoying, but it isn't infuriating.
Gotcha.
And pre-patch, it was the most bullshit thing in the series ever.
Wow, okay, yeah.
If you can find a video of it, I'd look it up, because it's, yeah. Words don't do it justice. And honestly, if you're looking to do something interesting, go play unpatched Dark Souls.
That's actually not a bad idea. I know that they basically quadrupled the soul distribution in the game.
You got a lot more soul, yeah, because I think my guy that I beat the game with originally, which I beat the game and then I beat the game and got into New Game Plus, and then I pretty much never touched him again. I think he's at like soul level 78. Which, pretty low. And, Yeah, and there's a couple like of neat strategy tricks and changes that they did. Like Iron Flesh was super, super, super powerful in the original version.
Yeah, there were. I think that a few of the boss-oriented weapons and some of the spells were just like, I mean, laughably game-breaking.
Yeah. The shield you get from Moonlight Butterfly was like viable as a weapon.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember the gold-hemmed robes were really good. Like their stats.
Yeah, they were
way
the best.
too good
They were
for
the
how
best
light
armor
they
in the
were.
game. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, if you ever get the chance, go play a non-patch version of Dark Souls 2. Of Dark Souls. I've kind of wanted to do that for a while just to see what's changed. But anyway, back to the DLC.
Yeah, so you fight these little dinosaur guys, and their mouths are oddly reminiscent of the serpents. I think the primordial serpents. Probably a coincidence, but I don't know. Oh, and they have a really cool crawling skin texture. I like.
Well, actually, now that you say that about the primordial serpent things, aren't they? I think they might be called like primordial something.
Really?
Might actually be their name. Yeah.
Yeah, they're interesting because I guess if you're Sam Fisher enough, you can sneak by them. Maybe they're blind. I mean, the possibility seems to be there, but boy, is it annoying.
They have pretty much the worst running away attack ever, which is the giant dark orb that explodes.
Yes. Oh
when
my
it gets near you.
God.
Which that attack seems like it's designed to punish you for running away.
Yeah, the hitbox on it is like a skyscraper.
I kind of feel like they should drop that, and that should be like a high-level hex or something. You raise your bridge with the dragon stone that you found, hopefully randomly inside of the temple, and you get your shortcut back up to the start, which, like, I really like shortcuts, and in Dark Souls they were really well implemented. They're kind of not as cool in Dark Souls 2, just because you can warp to any bonfire all the time.
I agree.
So they're not as meaningful.
I think the DLC, even though you can just warp between bonfires, the shortcuts are neat though. I appreciate how they're done. They feel like they're designed even if you don't have the ability to warp between bonfires. And that's a lot easier to do when you're only dealing with like 2.5 areas. But
Yeah.
I still really appreciated it.
And then you get into your,
St. Francis Folly.
Now, what this area does have that I did not dig is the Dragonblood Knights.
You didn't like them?
Because I liked how they looked. I didn't like that in order to be difficult, they completely ignore the concept of poise.
Oh, that's fine. I mean, I think it kind of lends a little more credence to parrying or backstabbing, or just being extremely selective with how you fight. It kind of lended a nice like holy shit moment when I finally killed one, and then I fight 3 more on the way down. So I thought that was kind of cool.
I don't like the ignoring game mechanics, and it's one of those. I would say enemies lacking poise is one of my larger problems with this DLC, specifically for a boss fight we're going to talk about later.
Okay.
And I don't like ignoring game mechanics to make something hard. I feel like they should be stunned with certain stuff, and they're stunned with a few magic spells very briefly, but I was going in with a pretty beefy character, like about soul level 160, 40 strength, 40 dex, using halberds, and I wasn't stunning them. And it's one of those things where you can fight intelligently too, but there's also something to be said about if the enemy finishes an attack and you hit them in the face with an attack, and then they just immediately attack through that. Like, it's a bit frustrating, and I didn't really die to them a lot or anything. I just don't like that as an enemy concept.
I can see that, but at the same time, I feel like there have to be kind of bullshit exceptions to certain enemies. Otherwise, the same tactic can be applied to fighting too many enemies in the game. Especially because, and granted, this is sort of like attaching a band-aid to a broken leg, because a lot of the most cited issue with the Dark Souls 2 enemies I think people have is that a lot of them are just like sword and shield enemies, and these are exactly that. But nonetheless, I think that, you know, kind of giving them an exception you have to work around is still fundamentally a good idea. I would rather them have no poise than be able to be poise broken, at least as more easily than they are now. Maybe they could do with having less health, I could concede, but
Yeah.
overall, I like them as enemies, and I appreciate them, that they are threatening, and you know, there are tactics to circumvent their advantage. So
There are. It's just one of those things that I have a fundamental dislike of. We're going to ignore the game mechanics here to make this challenging, because I feel like instead of doing that, you could have spent more time designing the enemy. So instead of that, you say, okay, well, instead he's going to use a greatsword, and he's going to have some unique moves that maybe have a really wide range, so you have to dodge him in a specific way, and a specific time in order to sneak up on him and stuff. Because it doesn't feel fairly difficult, I guess is what I'd say. The ability to circumvent something and to mitigate something being kind of a cheat thing doesn't necessarily mean it's not cheap. And I feel like these guys are maybe a little cheap of, if I can spin to win you and that takes off 3/4 of your health and yet you can still attack through my attack. Like, if you're going to have an enemy that can attack through my attacks, that's fine. But maybe don't make them a human-sized enemy that moves at human speed. Maybe make them a 1.5 size enemy that is slightly stronger and slightly slower. And that will give me time to attack. And there are a couple of other enemies in Dark Souls 2 that can kind of approach that. Like, I know the Hammer Knights that we've talked about in Dragon Shrine a bit, I think.
Mm-hmm. But then, you know, you also end up with enemies like the sickle guys in Huntsman's Copse that are super easy. I would rather have an enemy that has a more narrow range of options for approach, that makes them intimidating and challenging, even if it is a little bullshitty. I can deal with that. Than an enemy that I can kind of sleep while fighting. And I feel like a lot of these enemies that can be poise broken or do have, like, their attacks are too easily dodged or they're too big or something. I feel like that's kind of something that a lot of them suffer from. So in this case, I appreciate the Dragonblood Knights are enemies that when I encounter them, I'm still scared to fight them, and I can't say that about many Dark Souls enemies. So they kind of win for me just on that regard.
I guess my final point that I would just always default to is I would rather see something be made unique and interesting and to see a challenge I haven't seen before than just, this guy just ignores you when you hit him.
I suppose. But I guess we've argued enough about that. Let's talk about what's at the bottom of this room.
Yeah. Well, there's 2 NPCs you can summon for this boss fight.
Yes, I think that Benny is here.
Yeah,
you
Ben
can
Hart.
summon him for 6 boss fights if you count the DLC. Is he the most summonable NPC in the series? I think he is.
It's, are you sure it's 6? I think it's 5.
It's 5 locations, but you can summon him for the Throne Bros and
Oh,
for
yeah,
Nashandra.
that's true, because, Nashandra and Defender Watcher count for 2. That would be 6. I think it would, because let's see, Solaire, I think you can summon 4 or 5 times.
5. He surpasses Solaire. So
yeah,
dang. There's also Steelheart Ellie. I haven't summoned either of them for this boss fight, by the way. I've done it totally solo, so I don't know how they hold up.
Steelheart Ellie is pretty tanky, but she also deals like 0 damage. So she's good as a target, which is a good thing for this boss.
I was gonna say, even just having a distraction would be very helpful. So what is your opinion? Now this is going to be very divisive. My opinion of you hinges greatly on what you think of this boss fight, so I'm really curious about what you think of this fight of
the
Queen
fight
Elana.
Against Elana, I think, is mechanically interesting, but I dislike that it seems like there's a lot of reused assets. And instead of seeing reused assets, I would have rather seen original.
Okay, alright. Reused assets, aside from her summons, which I think the oh shit factor of one of her summons, I'm willing to forgive the reused asset here. Enlighten me about what other things here you dislike in terms of reused assets.
Well, most of her spells are reused assets, and it can be kind of cool at times, but that is one of my larger problems with this DLC, is obviously it's part of Dark Souls 2, so it's going to use Dark Souls content for itself. But I feel it reuses assets for key situations that is kind of disappointing. And that for so this boss makes some use of reused assets, and then the boss fight later on in the cave is completely reused assets. And it's one of those, I would rather see original stuff than see reused. And it makes me a little disappointed because the fights are mechanically cool, they're fun to fight, and they are interesting. But it just feels like they could have gone the extra step, and if they had been completely unique and like visually stunning and something we'd never seen before, that would elevate them to another
level. We're not talking about the essential raid fight a bit later on, but for Elana, I guess, yeah, her spells are reused. I was expecting you to say she's in the Chandra reskin, and I was going to fight that, but you didn't say that,
well,
so never mind.
Well, because my thing is, it makes sense that she looks like that from a lore perspective, so I don't have as much of a problem with that. Like I said, it'd still be cool to kind of see a more original skin, and it's one of those, I guess it's just a headcanon concept of, I think it would be totally awesome if, and I guess this is the implication of this, that every shard of Manus is now like an evil creature in its own right, and I love to think there's an army of Manus shards all kind of working to their own nefarious ends in all the corners of the earth.
Yeah, that's what I gathered, sort of, is that in this case we've seen 2 shards take the form of queens that are like systematically eroding these lands that they inhabit now. That is fucking cool, and I really like that idea.
Yes. And as for the mechanics of the fight, as I said, I really like this fight. I have a fondness for summoners, and she's a summoner. And she uses her summons in cool ways. She has the skeletons, and she has Veldstat, and she's a summon I've only ever seen her do once, which is pigs.
Yeah, and it's not any pigs, it's the Majula piglets.
Yeah, it's the Majula piglets.
That's pretty awesome. I have not seen that.
I kind of like the implication that, like, the Majula piglets are agents of Manus.
They drop red-eye orbs, so you never know. Yeah. I haven't seen that. It must be, and I fought her a few times, so it must be a pretty uncommon one. Okay. So,
yeah, she summons 3 golden pigs from Majula, and they all went down in one hit when I fought them.
Oh, wow.
But thankfully, I actually have it on my recording of this fight, so...
Oh, excellent. Please put it...
It should be showing up in the video, yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, when I was talking about my favorite boss fight in the series, maybe, I would say this is it. And
really?
Yes. It does reuse certain assets, but it all comes together in a way that makes me play this boss fight in a way I don't play any other Souls boss fight.
Yeah.
The only maybe comparable one is if you fight like Smelter Demon, where there's that urgency of every time you're near him, you take damage. Granted, the damage is not that much, and if you're careful and you dodge well, it's not that much of an issue. Probably more similarly is maybe Mytha, if you don't drain the room and you're fighting while poisoned the whole time. But then Mytha herself is not as much of a threat as Smelter Demon. So with Elana, you have a boss fight who is very simple on her own, and then with the mobs she summons, they complement the way she fights in such a potently balanced way, it is mind-boggling. So she has skeletons, and the skeletons won't bum rush you. This feels very smartly designed because a couple of them will usually hang back, and you'll have to fight, typically, one skeleton while fighting and dodging her attacks, but you still have to keep the other skeletons in mind because they're going to be a factor. Then she summons Veldstad. This is so brilliant because there's no exception here. It's not like, oh my god, it's Veldstad for oh shit factor. Like you're fighting Veldstad. I mean, he has a smaller life bar, but you're literally fighting 2 bosses at once. And it's like, it's so intense and so nerve-wracking and ridiculously fun. It feels like it is challenging in the best way possible. And, best of all, Elana doesn't go down in like 10 hits. She's got a pretty meaty life bar, so that boss is going the boss is going to go places.
Yeah, if nothing else, Elana is a more worthier final boss to this game than Nashandra is.
I don't know. If you're going Nashandra on a no-death run, I think you'll change your mind on that.
Yeah.
I think it's ironically fitting that Nashandra is going to be one of your biggest enemies in a no-death run, and she's the final boss. But anyway, yeah, Elana knocked me on my ass literally a few times, and in terms of just wow factor. Also, her intro, you walk in and she has a line for you, and she's not even facing you when you start to fight her. Then she turns around and summons her weapon, and the fight starts. That was such an amazing intro, and that room is like one of the best boss arenas in the series. It kind of reminds me of, it's like up there.
Yeah, it's very atmospheric.
Yeah, it's like Pinwheel's room, only this time it's inhabited by very worthy boss fights. Yeah, that set dressing, that mural on the wall, the candles, I mean, the line she says, her design, the stuff she does, I mean, just the pacing and the challenge of that boss was so perfect. Like, I would not change a thing about it. So yeah, I don't know. Like, there are a lot of boss fights I like in the Soul series. I really like Old King Allant is one of my favorites, and I really like the Executioner's Chariots and Smelter Demon, of course. Ornstein and Smo and Seif and Manus, but I feel like Elana is, I don't know, there's something to her, some degree of just overwhelming, like charisma, and just mixed with perfect sense of challenge, and anyway, love that boss. So
So yeah, you've said a lot of your positives, and I've had my couple of complaints about it, and I guess to cap that off, what I'd say is Ornstein and Smo, one of my favorite fights in the series. I think it's kind of like one of everyone's favorite fights in the series. Mm-hmm. And I would say, like, for me, having everything in that fight be completely 100% original, even if it functioned exactly the same way, even if it just looked completely like something we'd never seen, would take that to, like, the next level for me. And then that would be, like, because mechanically I think it's an awesome fight, and it's one of those, I don't like being disappointed that it's reused assets, but it's just kind of like an innate reaction. Mm-hmm. But anyway, right after that, there's another boss fight.
Yes, this is what I guess you would say is the final boss of the DLC, and man, this guy has an intro.
This is a video game boss.
Yes. Would you say it's the best dragon boss in the series?
I have to play it a little bit more.
Okay.
Because he's in the running with Calamite.
Right.
I mean, I think that's about all there is, I think. Because it's like, I mean, there's a few more dragons, definitely, but I think that's the top of my list right now, is this guy and Calamite. But I've just played Calamite so much more, so I need to play this guy a little bit more.
Yeah.
I'd give the edge to Calamite right now, though. What about you? Do you say best dragon?
I don't know. I like the area for Sin, I don't know.
Yeah.
I like his...
Just as a side note, sorry to interrupt you, but it's really weird talking about Dark Souls because we now have to pronounce names that I have never, like, pronounced out loud before.
Yeah.
Like, I've never, like... Sign's a good one because it's one of those, in my head, it sounds right when I've been saying that, like, oh, this guy's Sign. And then I say it, and I'm like, wait, that sounds dumb, or that sounds, like, not right.
Yeah.
And I've repeatedly done that while doing this. Like, wait, that doesn't sound okay.
Yeah, I don't know where the pronunciation for this is in terms of this guy's name, but I think I'm gonna go with Sin or Sin. I don't know, but
who knows? Anyway, for the fight.
Yeah, boy, he likes to stay airborne a lot.
Yes.
So, yeah, a very, very cool boss fight. Obviously, I like that he takes forever to kill. I mean, it's kind of annoying. But yeah, he's very pattern-oriented. He doesn't have that kind of frantic, oh shit factor of the boss that precedes him, so I think he's, easier. But I think if you're going to do like a big dragon boss fight, I think he's done pretty well, even if he's maybe easier than I would have liked him. So
he's a fun fight, and by the way, the 2 summons you can get for this fight are pretty cool. I would say they're among the top tier summons in the series.
Yeah.
For the NPCs here.
Once again,
I'm guessing you haven't summoned them yet.
No, I didn't. But one of them is a Dragon Knight.
Yeah, one of them, it's the Dragon Knights from Dragon Shrine. And he is probably one of, if not the best, summons in the game.
Really?
And the only real reason is like, he dies is because of the boss he's fighting. Like, you could set him up against most of the other bosses in the game and you'd probably win.
Wow.
He's like about Jester Thomas tier in terms of power. But it's just kind of unfortunate that he ends up, like, he doesn't show off as much as he can because he ends up fighting a boss that's constantly airborne that he can't hit half the time.
So, what weapon is he using, by the way?
The Dragon Longsword.
Dragon Longsword, okay. Is that a DLC weapon?
No, it's the Longsword you get dropped from the Dragon Knights.
Oh, okay, so something I'll never see.
In Dragon Shrine. Yeah, it's like an absurdly low drop rate. I think it's like one of the best longswords in the game, next to Sunlight Sword, because I think it has like A strength scaling and I think B or C in Dex.
Gotcha. That's pretty cool. Awesome.
But it's the sword that the dragons use. So you've seen what it looks like if you've just fought those guys.
Yeah. Pretty simple boss fight. I don't think there's much to say about him in terms of fighting him, so he's airborne a lot.
I played this fight before recording this, and it's a weird fight because when I fought him originally, I thought this was like a really chaotic fight, and I was doing just kind of like running around trying to survive. But he really is a very pattern-based boss fight. I would say there's not necessarily a lot of the time you can get into attack him.
Yeah.
But it's like, if you're careful, this is a pretty easy fight. I'd say it's probably easier than Calamite.
Yeah, I would say so. I think that even though you could easily kill Calamite far quicker, the fact that he's grounded and he is, I think, a lot more aggressive with his attacks makes him a lot more challenging. This boss, you can't afford to take your time, and the fight kind of rewards you with it because, you know, it is a very step-by-step fight, which I think is fine. I think it suits the theme and the pacing, and I think it, even if it's lengthened maybe a little too long by his patterns, because he can be airborne for a long time, or he'll drop and he won't do something that allows you to easily hit him. I think that his entrance kind of facilitates a big, lengthy fight. So
yeah, and I think if there's a complaint, or I guess just comment maybe on this fight that I have, it's this fight is like a test of how well you can control the camera, because
oh god, the lock-on does not extend very far.
Yeah, the lock-on does not work for this fight at all, and I would almost say this fight is more ambitious than the camera would allow it to be.
Yeah. Because
you definitely need to have your, like, camera control mastered.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Also, my grave disappointment in that is that cutting off his tail does not give you anything.
Yeah, that's something that is just not in Dark Souls 2 otherwise. It was interesting they added that, and then there's no, I guess, incentive. I think his tail can maybe hurt you in some of his attacks, but it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, it's both a positive and a negative, because he doesn't do his tail swipe attack once you cut it off anymore, but that's also a really good time to hit him.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a mixed bag, but I guess the thing we haven't talked about is I do really like the kind of poison and toxic effect that goes on in this fight.
Yeah.
That's a pretty cool gimmick to have, especially for such a large arena like this, where he's basically doing area denial.
Yeah, I agree. That is one aspect of this fight that a lot of bosses in Dark Souls don't utilize, is he controls the battlefield, and the toxic is very potent. I mean, it's very easy to get toxic infected. I don't know. It's very easy to be susceptible to toxin in this case, and yeah, I that was one of the coolest elements of the fight, I think. So.
I will be interested to hear what you think of the center, because I am fairly opinionated on this boss.
I loved this boss
Now, if you liked that, you might want to check out our crit play for Resident Evil 4. It's not with Kai, but it's the same format, so if you liked how this video worked, you might like that one too. And we also have an ongoing LP for Dark Souls 2. And if you like Dark Souls, we have a full LP for the original Dark Souls, which my friend goes into playing blind, and I kind of guide him through it. Kai also runs a few Dark Souls related things online, and I've tossed some links in the description of this video where you can check out his stuff.